The day begins not with comfort, but with the stench of damp straw and unwashed bodies. You awaken in a wooden hut, its roof leaking from the previous night's rain, and your blanket is little more than a rough woolen cloth. In the distance, church bells toll, a reminder that faith, not comfort, dictates the rhythm of life. If you were a peasant, your first task would be labor in the fields before dawn. If you were a soldier in the service of a lord, your day might begin sharpening weapons or preparing armor for battle. There is no coffee, no warm shower, no moment of leisure. Life is survival, and survival begins the moment your eyes open. Already the odds are against you. Hunger gnaws at your stomach. Bread is scarce, and meat is a luxury only nobles taste regularly. The water in your bucket is not clean, but it must be drunk. By sunrise, your body aches, and your day has only begun. To survive even the first morning requires a strength modern people rarely know. The Middle Ages do not wait for weakness. As the sun rises higher, war drums echo across the fields. In medieval Europe, battles were not distant spectacles. They came to your doorstep. Lords demanded service, and peasants often had no choice but to march alongside knights, whether trained or not. Imagine being handed a spear, a weapon taller than yourself, and told to hold the line. You have never seen true combat, yet you stand shoulder to shoulder with men who may desert at the first clash. The enemy approaches, shields shining, banners whipping in the wind. There is no training camp, no protective gear for common soldiers. Your armor might be little more than padded cloth. Arrows whistle through the air, and you realize the battlefield is chaos. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and death finds you instantly. In modern times, we watch wars on screens. In the Middle Ages, war was inescapable. You would not last the march, let alone the clash of steel. If the battlefield didn't claim you, the camp might. Soldiers lived packed together in filth, with no understanding of hygiene. Food spoiled quickly, meat carried worms, bread grew mold, and water turned foul. Yet hunger forced you to eat and drink anyway. Soon, fevers swept through tents. Dysentery, smallpox, and plague could kill more men than enemy swords. Coughing soldiers lay on the ground, shivering under thin blankets, while rats crawled freely between sleeping bodies. Doctors, if they existed, they relied on superstition more than science. A barber surgeon might bleed you to release the bad humors, leaving you weaker than before. Amputations were done without anesthesia, screams echoing through the night. Even if you avoided combat, the invisible war against disease was merciless. In truth, survival in a medieval army camp was less about strength and more about sheer luck. Death in the Middle Ages was never far away. On the battlefield, bodies piled quickly, left unburied for days as armies moved on. The stench of rot filled the air, carried by wind across villages. Flies swarmed, and with them came infection. For the average soldier, or even a villager, the sight of dismembered corpses was ordinary. Horses trampled the dead. Wheels of supply carts crushed limbs into the mud, and scavenging dogs fought over scraps of human flesh. To modern eyes, it would be unbearable. To medieval eyes, it was simply life. The psychological weight was immense. Few had the luxury to mourn. If you stopped to grieve, you risked your own life. The war machine moved forward, and so did you. Survival demanded a hardened heart, one that modern people rarely possess. To witness this, even for one day, would shatter most of us. If the battlefield did not kill you, hunger might. Armies often outpaced their supply lines, leaving soldiers to raid villages or scavenge what they could.
For peasants, war meant their fields were stripped bare, leaving their families to starve. A meal might consist of stale bread dipped in thin broth, or a handful of boiled oats. Fresh vegetables were rare, fruit almost non-existent in winter. Salted fish or pork, when available, was tough and nearly inedible. Malnutrition was constant, and with it came weakness. Now imagine fighting a war on an empty stomach. Your legs tremble as you march, your grip weakens on your weapon, your vision blurs from lack of nourishment. There are no energy bars, no protein shakes, no warm kitchens. The Middle Ages were a war against hunger, a battle that most would not win.
When armies passed through villages, destruction followed. Soldiers burned crops to deny food to the enemy, looted homes for supplies, and often set fire to churches and barns. Innocent people, women, children, the elderly were not spared. To be a villager meant living with constant terror. At any moment, riders might appear, torches in hand, demanding tribute or blood. Families hid in forests, leaving behind their homes to be reduced to ash. For the invaders, pillage was both necessity and reward. Without pay, soldiers were paid with plunder. Silver goblets, livestock, and even human lives were taken. Captives might be sold as slaves or ransomed back to their families. In this world, your home was never safe. War did not distinguish between soldier and civilian. The fire consumed all.
The moment finally arrives, the battle itself. Imagine standing in formation, your hands trembling as you clutch a spear or crude axe. Across the field, the enemy shouts war cries, their banners snapping in the wind. The ground shakes as armored knights on horseback thunder forward. The noise is deafening. Trumpets blast, drums pound, and men scream as arrows rain from the sky. You try to raise your shield, but the weight is unbearable. Spears collide, swords clash, and the line breaks instantly into chaos. There is no order, no discipline for the common soldier. You fight for your life, swinging blindly in a storm of blood and steel. The smell of iron and sweat overwhelms you. A man falls beside you, his chest pierced by a lance, and another stumbles into the mud with his throat cut open. You realize there is no room to escape. The press of bodies traps you, and the terror of suffocation becomes as real as the threat of the sword. One slip, one stumble, and you will be trampled beneath the boots of friend and foe alike. The clash of steel is not heroic. It is chaos, filth, and fear, and if you think you could survive one medieval battle, you are mistaken.
In stories, knights are noble protectors, symbols of honor. But on a medieval battlefield, they were engines of terror. Mounted on massive war horses, clad in steel, they were nearly invincible to the common soldier. You, with your wooden spear and thin cloth armor, would stand no chance. A charging knight could split your skull with a mace or crush your body beneath his horse. Even a glancing blow from his sword would cripple you instantly. For peasants and infantry, the knight was less a man than a moving fortress. Many soldiers broke ranks at the very sight of them. To face one meant death, or worse, capture. Knights often ransomed noble prisoners, but peasants had no such value. You would be left to rot on the field. And yet, knights themselves were not gods. Behind their shining armor lay men who sweated, bled, and feared. But to you, standing with no training, no shield wall, and no hope, a knight's shadow would mean the end of your day.
You survived the battle, miraculously, But survival is only the beginning. Night falls, and the world does not rest. The battlefield lies scattered with corpses, groans of the wounded rising into the black sky. You have no lantern, no campfire. The darkness is absolute. Somewhere nearby, wolves and scavenger dogs circle, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. The cold sets in. With no blanket, you shiver in your damp clothes, clutching your knees for warmth. Hunger returns, sharper than before, gnawing at your belly. If you're lucky, you might chew a piece of hard bread pulled from a dead man's satchel. Then comes the fear. Raiders often strike at night, looting the wounded and killing survivors. Every crack of a branch makes your heart race. Sleep is impossible, for to close your eyes is to risk never opening them again. The Middle Ages did not end when the sun went down. The night was a second battlefield, one of cold, hunger, fear, and shadows.
Surviving open battle doesn't guarantee safety. Fortified castles promised refuge, but they were rarely a sanctuary. To survive a siege was to endure weeks of relentless torment. The attackers would surround the walls, battering gates with massive wooden rams, launching flaming arrows and hurling stones to crush defenders. Inside, the defenders faced their own horrors. Food ran low, water became stagnant, foul with algae and debris. Rats gnawed at anything edible, and disease spread faster than the enemy's weapons. People fought over scraps, and desperation often drove them to cannibalism in extreme cases. Smoke from fires and burning siege engines choked the air. Every night, the sound of enemy troops drilling, shouting, and launching attacks kept the castle in constant tension. Sleep was shallow, punctuated by the screams of those wounded or dying. Even the lucky few who survived the initial assaults were left weakened, sick, and traumatized. A siege was not merely a battle of arms. It was a war against patience, strength, and the limits of human endurance. For the unprepared, surviving a single day within a besieged castle was almost impossible.
As days turned into nights, starvation became more pressing than any sword or arrow. People chewed leather, boiled roots, and drank water mixed with mud just to survive. Children, too weak to cry, were carried silently from one dark corner to another. Hunger and malnutrition sapped strength, making even small tasks unbearable. Arms drooped, legs buckled, and minds grew foggy. The strong fought, the weak fell, and the sick were often left to die. Beyond the immediate suffering, hunger fueled fear and violence. Families turned against neighbors for scraps of bread. Soldiers rioted, breaking into stores of grain. Starvation was a weapon in itself, wielded by both invaders and the natural cruelty of medieval life. Even for those outside the walls, the countryside was stripped bare. Fields burned, granaries emptied, livestock slaughtered. To walk across a medieval battlefield or village during war was to witness a landscape of desolation and despair. Survival depended not on courage, but on luck.
Some survived as mercenaries, hired swords wandering from lord to lord, but life on the road was no better. Mercenaries endured constant danger, unpredictable pay, and betrayal. One day they might feast on stolen meat, the next, they could be ambushed and killed by bandits. Disease, exposure, and exhaustion stalked them as much as enemy swords. Nights were spent in abandoned barns or muddy fields, often beside the corpses of travelers and soldiers who had succumbed to hunger or illness. No law protected them, and no lord truly valued their lives beyond their usefulness in combat. The road hardened the body, but scarred the mind. Fear became a constant companion, trust a luxury. Most mercenaries did not live long enough to retire. Those who survived carried invisible wounds that no armor could protect. Nightmares, guilt, and the memories of friends cut down beside them. In short, even the seemingly skilled and prepared could not escape the relentless cruelty of medieval war. One day on the road, and you might wish you had never left the hearth of your village.
In the Middle Ages, medicine was a mixture of superstition, trial, and often cruel practice. If you fell ill after battle, there was little hope. Local healers or barber surgeons might examine you, but their treatments were often worse than the disease. Bloodletting was common. A practitioner would cut veins or apply leeches to balance humors, often weakening patients until collapse. Herbs were used, sometimes with mild effect, but often misidentified or poisonous. Wounds were sewn without anesthesia, leaving screams echoing through camps and villages. Disease ran rampant. Infections from dirty battlefield wounds claimed countless lives. Fevers, gangrene, and plague struck without warning. The healer might sprinkle holy water or chant incantations, but medicine was unreliable and hope was fragile. Even those who survived treatment were left weakened, scarred, and often haunted by the memory. To live in this era was to know that every illness was potentially a death sentence, and that professional help offered little more than temporary comfort. Medieval women were not spared from the horrors of war. With men conscripted or killed, women often bore the brunt of survival. They tended the sick, hid children in forests, and scavenged for food amidst the ruins. The threat of violence was constant. Armies and marauders often attacked villages, and women faced kidnapping, rape, and death. Their labor became essential: cooking, carrying water, nursing the wounded, and even defending homes with whatever weapons were at hand. Yet, history rarely celebrates their endurance. Many perished quietly, unrecorded, their struggles hidden behind the larger narrative of knights and lords. For a woman in a war-torn medieval village, a single day could involve back-breaking labor, terror, and heartbreak, with little chance of survival or reprieve. In truth, the Middle Ages demanded more than courage. It demanded near superhuman resilience. Without the protection of wealth, armor, or male kin, women faced a reality far harsher than most could imagine. Children, often forgotten in tales of war, endured unimaginable suffering. Malnourished and weak, they followed parents to fields, camps, or forests, witnessing death and destruction before they could even speak fully. Many were forced to work, tending animals, fetching water, carrying supplies for soldiers, or laboring in fields stripped bare. Education and play were luxuries. Survival was the only lesson. Disease, hunger, and violence loomed constantly. A single day for a medieval child could be terrifying, dodging marauders, scavenging for scraps, or hiding from knights whose horses trampled everything in their path. Innocence was a luxury that vanished quickly, leaving fear and grief as constant companions. Even if a child survived physically, the psychological toll was immense. Nights were sleepless, filled with cries of the wounded, the groans of the dying, and the roar of conflict beyond their shelter. One day in the Middle Ages could rob a child of everything, leaving only trauma and memories of relentless suffering.
In the midst of war, the blacksmith's forge was both a lifeline and a hazard. Metal weapons and armor were essential for survival, yet the work was grueling. Blacksmiths labored from dawn until dusk, hammering red-hot iron, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Mistakes were costly. A poorly forged sword could break in combat, leading to death. Armor that didn't fit properly offered little protection, and the clanging of hammers often echoed over battlefields and camps, reminding everyone that survival depended on both skill and speed. Heat, smoke, and constant danger took a physical toll. Burns, cuts, and crushed fingers were common. Even a simple error could mean the loss of life for a soldier relying on your work. The blacksmith's day was a relentless cycle of creation under pressure, the stakes higher than most modern workers could comprehend. By night, fatigue weighed heavily. Yet sleep was fleeting, for armies could arrive at any moment demanding weapons or repairs. To exist in this role was to be both a creator and a participant in the endless machinery of medieval war. One day of such labor would break all but the strongest spirits.
Some tried to escape war by traveling as pilgrims, seeking sanctuary in distant abbeys or holy sites. Yet travel was dangerous, roads patrolled by bandits, soldiers, and the unpredictability of nature itself. Pilgrims faced hunger, exposure, and the constant threat of robbery or violence. Villages they passed were often deserted or hostile, as the locals hoarded what little food remained. Nights were spent in forests or ruined churches, shivering beneath the open sky. Disease followed wherever groups of travelers congregated. Typhus, dysentery, and fevers claimed the weak and weary. Even prayers and holy relics could not shield one from the harsh realities of medieval life. By the end of a single day on the road, pilgrims were often exhausted, malnourished, and deeply fearful. Their journey was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about survival, an endless test of endurance in a world where danger was omnipresent.
Behind the scenes of war, siege engineers worked tirelessly to breach walls and fortifications. Their knowledge of mechanics and physics was advanced for the era, but their labor was perilous. Constructing trebuchets, battering rams, and ladders required precision under constant threat. Arrows, fire, and boiling oil rained down from defenders. One miscalculation could destroy the machinery or your life. Siege engineers often labored day and night, sweat mixed with grime, their hands blistered and cracked from rope and woodwork. They endured fear, exhaustion, and the weight of responsibility. Every misstep could mean failure for their comrades. Even if a siege succeeded, engineers faced looting, disease, and exhaustion that often left them near death. In this way, survival in medieval warfare demanded more than courage. It demanded skill, endurance, and a degree of luck most modern people could never imagine.
Sappers, soldiers who dug tunnels under enemy walls, faced some of the deadliest tasks of medieval war. Working underground in darkness, they used picks and shovels to undermine fortifications, often while enemy defenders above tried to detect them. The risk was constant. Tunnels could collapse, burying men alive. Smoke, dust, and suffocating air made each breath a struggle. Explosives were primitive, yet deadly if mishandled. One spark, one miscalculation, and the entire crew could vanish in an instant. Even without catastrophe, the psychological strain was immense. The earth pressing from all sides, the cries of distant combat above, and the knowledge that death was a constant companion made the sappers' work a test of nerves as much as skill. Few modern people could endure a single day in such conditions. Each hour underground was a fight for survival, and only the strongest or luckiest emerged alive.
Information was as deadly as steel in the Middle Ages. Spies and scouts risked execution if caught behind enemy lines. Disguises were crude, communication slow, and betrayal a constant threat. A spy's day began with careful observation,
noting troop movements, counting soldiers, memorizing supply routes. One wrong step, one suspicious glance, and discovery could lead to torture or immediate death. Survival required cunning, patience, and nerves of steel. The fear was relentless. No moment of respite existed, and the knowledge that capture meant a gruesome death weighed heavily. Many spies vanished without a trace, victims of either the enemy or their own mistakes. Even a single day of espionage demanded more courage and skill than most could muster. Modern life offers security and predictability. Medieval espionage offered only danger and uncertainty.
Archers were the backbone of medieval armies, yet their role was far from safe. Standing exposed to enemy fire, they drew back heavy bows, aiming at soldiers and knights while avoiding incoming arrows and spears. Every shot demanded precision, strength, and timing. A misfire could strike a comrade or leave the archer vulnerable. Supplies were limited, arrows were precious, and missing a target meant wasting life-saving resources. Their camps were filthy, food scarce, and disease rampant. Exposure to the elements added another layer of danger. Rain could ruin bowstrings, frost could numb fingers, and sunburn could sap energy. A single day as a medieval archer was a relentless test of skill, endurance, and courage. Death was never far, whether from enemy fire, disease, or exhaustion. Few modern humans could survive it, and fewer still would retain their sanity.
Wagoners, responsible for transporting supplies, weapons, and sometimes wounded soldiers, faced a relentless grind. Their wagons were heavy, often rickety, and pulled through mud, rocks, and uneven terrain. One overturned cart could crush a man, destroy critical supplies, or block an entire army's march. They worked from dawn to dusk, exposed to weather, disease, and enemy ambushes. Rain turned roads to quagmires, heat sapped strength and caused dehydration, thieves and marauders preyed on the weak, and every trip could be fatal. Despite the apparent simplicity of their task, survival demanded constant vigilance, physical strength, and endurance. Wagoners were the silent backbone of the medieval army, but their lives were rarely celebrated. A single day could break the body, scar the mind, and erase hope of survival.
Not all danger came from foreign armies. Peasants, driven by hunger and oppression, occasionally rose in revolt against lords or oppressive taxation. Participating or being caught in the crossfire was deadly. Imagine waking to the screams of neighbors, barns burning, and arrows flying overhead. Villagers turned against one another in desperation, and chaos reigned. Survival depended on speed, cunning, and sometimes sheer luck. Even those who fled were not safe. Forests offered little protection against disease, exposure, or pursuing soldiers. Hunger, fatigue, and fear made every step a potential death sentence. One day in a peasant revolt could feel like a lifetime of terror. Minstrels, traveling musicians, and storytellers often moved through war-torn lands, witnessing horrors for both survival and performance. Their songs and tales recorded battles, sieges, and tragedies, but being a witness was dangerous. Minstrels traveled lightly, unarmed, and depended on hospitality. Villages were often empty or hostile, camps dangerous, and armies suspicious of outsiders. Disease, exposure, and occasional executions for perceived spying were constant threats. Yet, minstrels carried stories forward, even as death stalked every road. Their day involved walking through mud and blood, seeing the aftermath of battles, and avoiding the dangers others faced head-on. Surviving even one day as a wandering minstrel required resilience, luck, and the skill to remain invisible amid chaos. Even if you survived the battles, sieges, and starvation, disease could strike without warning.
The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century, killed millions. Fleas, rats, and unsanitary conditions made infection almost inevitable. A single day in an affected village could mean seeing loved ones fall ill before your eyes. Fevers, blackened skin, swollen lymph nodes. Death came quickly, often within days. Physicians had little understanding of disease. Prayers and potions offered false hope at best. Survivors lived in constant fear. Travel was dangerous, contact with strangers risky, and every cough or fever a potential death sentence. Even if you avoided war and hunger, the invisible armies of bacteria and plague were relentless. One day in this environment could wipe out families, leaving nothing but despair in its wake.
Some sought safety in monasteries, hoping faith would protect them. Walls of stone offered shelter, but not comfort. Monks shared meager food, and overcrowding spread disease quickly. Visitors and refugees were forced into silence, often sleeping on cold floors. Daily routines included laborious chores, long prayers, and limited sustenance. Outside, marauders and soldiers passed unchallenged, and inside, hunger and disease threatened constantly. Even in sanctuary, survival demanded endurance. Monasteries were not hospitals or fortresses. They were crowded shelters, offering only temporary reprieve. One day inside these walls could feel as dangerous as the battlefield itself.
Merchants moving goods across medieval lands faced unique perils. Roads were long and treacherous, and bandits frequently attacked. One day's journey could involve negotiating tolls, paying bribes, or hiding from raiders. Merchants carried precious cargo, coins, spices, and textiles. Theft or attack meant ruin or death. Weather, poor roads, and illness added to the danger. Horses and wagons could collapse under weight or get stuck in mud, leaving the merchant vulnerable. Survival required vigilance, cunning, and sometimes deception. Even one day of travel demanded more skill and courage than most modern humans possess. A single mistake could end the journey or the life of the merchant entirely. Night falls again, and the soldier still stands guard. Exhaustion drags at every muscle, but vigilance cannot lapse. Enemy raids, wild animals, or traitorous allies are constant threats. The body is battered, hungry, and soaked from rain. The mind is a whirlwind of fear, pain, and memories of the day's carnage. Every shadow could conceal death. Every sound might be the harbinger of violence. Sleep is a distant memory. One misstep, one moment of inattention, and life could end abruptly. Even the bravest warriors of the age were not immune to despair. Survival demanded not only strength and skill, but unyielding endurance and a measure of luck beyond imagination. A single day, stretched into a night of terror, could leave a soldier broken, scarred, or dead. The battlefield did not pause for exhaustion or suffering. It moved relentlessly forward.
For those few who make it through, the morning brings no relief. The landscape is devastated. Villages burned, fields trampled, and bodies strewn across every path. Hunger gnaws at the stomach, wounds ache, and disease lurks everywhere. Survivors are haunted by the screams of the dying, the terror of battle, and the cruelty of a world without mercy. Families are torn apart, friends lost, and hope often seems an impossible luxury. One day in the Middle Ages is more than 24 hours. It is a trial of endurance, courage, and sheer will. It is a testament to the human capacity to survive under unimaginable pressure. Yet, even survival comes at a cost. Physical pain, emotional scars,
and the constant shadow of death.
The Middle Ages, particularly during times of war, were unforgiving. Life demanded constant labor, vigilance, and bravery. Hunger, disease, violence, and fear were omnipresent. Armor could not protect you from disease, swords could not shield you from starvation, and even walls of stone could not defend against pestilence. Modern comforts, medicine, hygiene, nutrition, and safety are luxuries medieval people did not know. One day in such a world could be fatal, and few could endure the physical and psychological strain. This documentary has shown that surviving even a single day in medieval warfare was extraordinary. The odds were stacked against every soldier, peasant, merchant, woman, and child. Life was a relentless battle against death, and history reminds us of the courage and suffering endured by those who came before us. The Middle Ages were not a romantic era of chivalry and heroism for the common person. They were a harsh, brutal, and often merciless struggle for survival. And for most, one day would be more than enough to claim their life.
Thank you for watching this journey through the harsh realities of the Middle Ages. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more immersive historical stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which part surprised you most. Stay curious and see you in the next adventure through time.